While I'm sharing my presentation, I can say that I am Lela Rekhviashvili. I am a researcher at Leibniz Institute for Regional Geography. There, together with colleagues, we have a project briefly called Commode that looks at former Soviet peripheries through a decolonial lens. And among these colleagues, I'm looking at the case of Tbilisi. Tbilisi is the capital of Georgia, a place in what we call for a global East, again, former Soviet country, independent for the last 3 decades only. The presentation, I tried to point out, the presentation draws on a paper that I have been working with together with actually Georgian colleagues that have been collaborating together with me to understand Tbilisi public. Just very briefly, I can also tell that right now I'm in Tbilisi, even though I'm usually based in Germany, in Leipzig, at this Leibniz Institute for Regional Geography. Right now I'm here, it's a big upheaval period. There is protests every day, so the situation is very tense. But I'll try to, and I can refer to how this can relate to reforms like this later in discussions. But before that, the story that I want to share is that the case is one of those cases where you have extremely car-dependent cities. Since the independence, this happened to many former Soviet, former socialist cities that they got very high motorization rates since 90s, 2000s. And surprisingly, in a way, because Tbilisi is otherwise a very neoliberal city, the state has withdrawn from many responsibilities in the city. But since mid-2000s and 2010s, and especially 2018, Tbilisi city government started turning to what they call sustainable urban mobility planning. Now, we look at this case and we think that decolonial thinking is very important to understand this case. And you will understand this further because I will be talking of how far donor dependent the reform is. But in this sense, we also do take 2 issues to summarize, right? Two issues with the existing decolonial literature. One is that we talk a lot in decolonial literature about how Northern knowledge might be inappropriate, unsuitable, and it is a lot about knowledge production and reproduction, but we don't always link knowledge production to coloniality of power, what we would call, that is more broader, structures of subordination, more broader political economic structures that base on basically erasure of certain knowledges, right? And I'll try to explain this further. And the other thing that we have been thinking of in relation to decolonial literature is to emphasize that no matter how much we would want to follow the type of imperative that decolonial literature offers us, that any decolonial knowledge should be radically at odds with hegemonic knowledge production, or we should disavow the epistemic grounds of the rhetoric of modernity. In practice, it's very, very hard. And it's very hard also from the perspective of global southern or eastern, something like Georgia in my case is basically south of the east, or very south-like country of the east. It's very hard from the position of local planners and practitioners and activists and researchers like myself that have half leg in places like this to really say keep up with the expectations of radical disavowing versus the methods and logics of hegemonic and modern knowledge, right? Still, to bring these discussions together, we still would argue that in that sense, then coloniality of knowledge needs to be, for the coloniality of knowledge to be understood, it has to be always linked with understandings of coloniality of power as well, which are defined as coloniality of power as interrelation among modern forms of exploitation and domination, while coloniality of knowledge is impact of colonialization on the different areas of knowledge production. So if we think of a case like Tbilisi, what we see very clearly, at least from this last 30 years history of Tbilisi, is that knowledge needed to be downplayed, local knowledge needed to be downplayed, eroded, erased to make space for specific new capitalist accumulation regimes. So in 90s, what we saw was the beginning of kind of abandoning former Soviet knowledge, rendering it as useless, as outdated, as also ideologically evil, which in terms of transport meant that the state kind of withdrew from provisioning transport. It also, of course, was related to economic challenges that the transition brought about, but it also was a lot about discarding the pre-existing knowledges and dismantling local planning systems. What we saw already in 2000s was physical erasure of pre-existing, and Tbilisi, as many other former Soviet cities, had quite an extensive public transport with its own challenges, but it had extensive public transport system, it had trolley buses, it had trams, and in 2000s we see physical undoing of all these remnants of these infrastructures to make way for the kind of first wave of capitalist accumulation in the city, which was investments in car infrastructure. As you see one of the pictures here of this messed up intersection with a lot of flyovers. This was the type of projects that were being built by the incoming capital as loans, right? Then as soon as these Soviet infrastructures are rolled out physically, already in early 2010s, the government started, activists, and the government started talking of the need of trams, because that would be European, and that would be also, instead of maintaining all infrastructures, this would be another very capital intensive project in the city. Gladly, this didn't come through because this would be throwing of a lot of finances into one line that would only serve the city center. What happened instead was more broad-based reform of the entire public transport system. Or what I said, this kind of sustainable urban mobility planning with its various aspects towards the end of 2010 and in early 2020. Now, this last stage, despite, in my understanding, being basically the next level of the same accumulation logic that I was talking about. So now, with these projects, various financial actors came to Tbilisi and said, and at that point also had obviously some kind of local support to say, now we have to undo the car infrastructures that we've done 10, 15 years ago. And now we have to remodel these streets for green, sustainable, and pedestrian-friendly infrastructures. The donor-driven logic of this type of reform first starts with, of course, grants. But as one of my interlocutors would say, first come the grants, then come the loans. The donors will invest to make studies that would identify gaps, that would identify the needs, and those serve as the base and justification to then give major loans to the city hall to implement or supposed plans. Another way that the coloniality of knowledge and power there intersects is that essentially when the projects come in, when the donors bring in this new money and they also bring in these new studies, what they need is to also train or have some base in city halls to work with, right? Because they need to engage with people. But what happens very often because of broader political economy of a state like Georgia is that for a couple of years, local staff will be trained, but then because the money comes into the state, it goes out of the state into consultancies, because such projects are, money coming in through donors, then going to consultancies, and consultancies can always pay better money to local experts than the city hall can, the city hall is always vulnerable to losing their experts. So in this sense, what I try to say is that, let's say, coloniality of knowledge is not simply inadequacy of northern knowledge in the south. Coloniality of knowledge is very strongly linked to powerful financial interests that need to declare certain knowledge is wrong and irrelevant and outdated in very short amount of time, so that new round of investment and accumulation can take place in peripheralized cities like Tbilisi. Now, despite this and despite understanding, despite understanding how problematic and how do I say, like how complicated this dynamic of intertwined coloniality of knowledge and power is, still from the ground we can and should also talk that none of this colonial overwhelming of coming expertise and coming finances is very one-sided. There are also cracks that some of my interlocutors would talk about, and there are also very important knowledges that the financial institutions bring. And it's very important then for us to emphasize that sometimes, despite very brutal dependence on external knowledge and finance, some of such projects can and do have very positive outcomes on social and spatial justice in cities, and in this case in Tbilisi. We have not worked on this in terms of transport poverty, but what we did observe is that in the scope of this reform, Tbilisi, which was really very, very congested city that essentially by mid-2000s barely had running public transport. It had really outdated old buses that were truly barely running. From that, we saw really major renewal of infrastructures. We saw much more increase in provision of public transport in terms of its fleet. We saw a lot of labor issues addressed. I have been also working on informal transport in Tbilisi. So this was, of course, the replacement once the, say, public transport or city municipality provided public transport became so thin. Private small buses very massively replaced public transport in this sense. But there was major issues with the type of labor exploitation that informal transit involved in Tbilisi. And with this reform, actually, it was quite an interesting and, in my understanding, very good thing that happened to these small buses, that they were incorporated in the route restructuring, and the drivers actually got fixed salaries, so they don't have to anymore fight for the penny. They don't have to overrun each other. They don't have to pursue the type of very typical risky driving behavior that one would observe here and in many other cities across East and South. And this process also really involved planning that now put the city in motion, or put the public transport reform in motion, that hopefully over time will lead towards full accomplishment of this reform. Now, to summarize, what I've been trying to tell you here is that, first, it is hard to understand coloniality of knowledge without linking it more tightly to coloniality of power. In case of transport, it's hard to understand transport expertise without understanding how much it serves the financial interests of global players, global financial institutions, and consultancies. Secondly, it's hard to still, despite it is very hard to reject Western knowledge and methods. On the one hand, precisely because of the point one, precisely because it's not just misleading knowledge, it's knowledge under or behind which there is really strong interests that us, sometimes also as independent researchers, but also as planners, activists, that we can't easily overpower. So we, in the end, very often end up needing to work with the cracks. But also on the other hand, because at certain points, indeed, the local knowledges are so depleted that there is a need of engagement, there is a need of learning. And even if it comes in form of very colonial overpowering, there is something good to take from. From what all we've thought through about this process, our bottom line discussion was that the only way to really, really kind of truly challenge this system is to allow local knowledge be sustained. But it's very, very hard again because of the type of political economy that the country like Georgia has. We can discuss this more. And for example, now new frontier that a city like Tbilisi will face, right, will be e-buses or hydrogen buses, that this reform is not finished, and they will want to sell us these because they will say this is now the new sustainability agenda. And it needs professionals to say, no, what we need is to finish up those 10 BRT corridors. So this is, I think, what one would need sustenance of local knowledge, so that we are not overpowered with new, dispossession mechanisms that come in the name of sustainability. I hope I didn't overtalk too much. Thanks.
So in the final presentation, we're going to hear from our old friend SG from Lagos State University, who's going to talk about some of these very interesting issues that have been raised by the previous speakers in the Nigerian context. And I think we'll offer a really grounded view about how some of these dynamics are also working there. Thanks, SG. That's fantastic.
Thank you very much. The title is the nexus between colonization and poverty in Africa. That's a pretty outline. Well, when I was searching for some ex-literature, I came across Luca et al., the work they did in 2016. And the journal brought out about these 5 highlights, and it just snapped with me that it's a very good preamble for me to explain the short paper. I just removed Oban because the first of the paper was Oban poor. So my approach here is just the poor. Whether urban or rural, and here especially the rural. So that transport poverty is an under-recognized additional burden is important. And there is policy inertia. In fact, I would say there is no policy at all. I've been involved in drafting national transportation policy for over 15 years at the federal level. And we've not yet completed. We have completed it, but political constitution, we keep shifting, changing. In Lagos State, where we are, we took about 8 years. It was just about last month that the government of Lagos State signed to law the transportation policy. In fact, I'm just from a program where the Commissioner of Transport, I asked, when are you going to launch this transport policy so that we know what is in it? So that we all the inputs that we put into that document to decolonize the transport system so that it will come out and we continue to advocate for it. So the issue of policy is very critical. And we said that the highlight 3 that I added that rural myself, that's at preamble, must rely on the formal transport regional system that it's more expensive than even the public transport system, and no regulation for those people. They charge what they want. So definitely transport poverty leads to social exclusion, and it's a social problem, and we are not saying it as such. Well, I mean, that paper also gave a good definition that I went along with. That's on equal distribution of transportation benefit and burden. And if transportation is the artery through which all socio-economic activities move, then once you have inequality in that area, then opportunities are not equally distributed. And so you can't go to your place of work, you can't go to the education. When I was young, my primary school is about 5 miles. That's about 8 kilometers from my village. That is, the village is like a local headquarters, but my own village is smaller than that. So I have to go to that place, which is about 8 kilometers every day, to and fro 16 kilometers. So, and you can't, no bus, no public transport. Those buses that comes once in a week is to carry things to the cities. Healthcare, the same thing. You have a pregnant woman and it's on labor, and you have to take, the labor is prolonged, protracted. But because the local midwives, we call them traditional birth attendants, cannot do anything, it is either you carry the woman in a wheelbarrow or on the back of the hospital to take to the hospital. So that is usually the most critical for me as a kid, to see that this woman is in labor and she has started since yesterday, so you can no longer cope. You have to take her to the main town, and that's about 20 kilometers away. So, not to talk of social participation is really a luxury. So, the historical context in our own case is that the colonial era powers came to for resource extraction, administrative control, and trade facilitation. And I said, this is not fault of theirs. They have their purpose, and they are here on purpose. So, and I listened to Lela, that is difficult to reject. Is very, very, very difficult to reject, because the Lagos State transportation system is being managed by the Commissioner of Transport, the head of LAMATA, that is Lagos Metropolitan Planning Authority, and the SA. All of these were British educated, and they worked in London metropolitan city. So I used to tell them, they cannot even extricate their thinking. That's the problem. That is, in the last 3 generations of commissioners of transport, they were all headhunted from London Metropolitan Transport Authority. And the World Bank will not give money unless they see the people that they've trusted, that, okay, they've done some work in London and they understand, or especially London Metropolitan Planning Authority is the Mecca. So the commissioner, the head of LAMATA, most of them were trained. So the roles were constructed, and this is now being perpetuated in our mental makeup. So the policy that we drafted, some of us that are grassroots transport people, we want to ensure that we use transport policy to change the orientation. Because once it becomes a policy, then it is what incoming commissioner of transport, head of transport agencies will follow, and not what has been dictated to them. But as I said, for 25 years, I've been involved, and we will finish one, then the government will change, then we will begin again, then we finish one. So the system. Now, one particular model that I came across with long time ago, very popular then, is Tafe Mori and Gold. It's a transport growth development that captured how transportation network grows, how it was developed. And interestingly, the study was carried out in 1963 in Ghana and Nigeria. So we relate with this very well. And how is it? And later we found out that this model works in South America and Asia. Now, in fact, indeed, when we went to Bangladesh, with Karen and other and the INTALiNC group, was because it has so much similarities with Lagos, that's their capital, that I now say, okay, these are the stages all over. I saw Lagos all over again in, I think Doha is their capital. Now, at the landing of the British explorer, all these spots where they landed becomes the nodes and the coastline. Then stage 2 will be when they now develop a trans inside the country into the hinterland. Then later, because those transits, we need to pick mineral resources along the line. There are now little networks around the nodes. Then at stage 3, the nodes is getting fully developed initially to capture slaves, to capture minerals, then to bring whatever mineral is coming from the West. So then at stage E, the nodes are now connected to be able to tap into, but most of it with footpath, with this. So, but the final stage, and this is now the interesting part that is being perpetuated everywhere, is the development of the priority route. It's like a fad. If you have not done 10 lanes inside your city, you have not started transport. And no, Karen used to repeat that we cannot build ourselves out of transport gridlock, especially with this highway. In fact, it is worsening things. And every time I go for a seminar, I used to tell them, the road between Marina and Badagry has been on for 20 years because they are building 10 lanes and trying to put a rail in the middle. The money on that road alone will have done almost entire Lagos, all the inner roads and the rural area combined. But they kept on thinking unless it is that, and I told them, these are priority routes are traffic collectors. Everybody will have to enter the expressway in order to go even to the next route that you could have just walked across. So these are the stages, and it demonstrated. If this one is what we understand, we know that, and the formation forms the spinal cord of our transport development. It is the concrete situation of colonization. Is a concrete form that I don't know how long it will take for this concrete form to change. Excuse me. All right. So now we are talking of decolonization here, but we are into another set of trouble. That is, we are now even getting decolonized, and we did something on the rail, especially rail and road too, in Nigeria, and it's an ongoing thing. It's not decolonization. So we have to really also step for me, like standing in front of a rail, a train, to stop the new set of recolonization. And unfortunately, the Chinese people have a different method that was so quietly seeping in. That is, if you do not notice, you will not know that this is a major recolonization, much more going to be more impactful in the long run than even the Western colonization, because they are not coming here to take resources away. They want to also dominate the area. They come to sign MOU in the design, in the alignment, in the raw material that we use, in the labor force that we will use, in technology. And the most ridiculous one that I can mention here is a road between Kano to Maradi. Like former president. But the Chinese were smart that, look, if we say we will take this road from your village to Niger Republic, you will love it. And if you check what is going on there, it's a complete design. Even the railway in Abuja is complete designed by the Chinese. And it is their labor force that is managing the place fully, because they believe that ones that can manage those things. And because they come with, as the second paper indicated, jumbo loans that are so opaque, it looks generous in the beginning, but later you know that it's really a trap. So that's the new trend. Look at the labor exploitation. Nigerian workers, in fact, we have slavish condition, low remuneration, casualization of labor, racism, and so. In fact, because most of them could come as bachelors, when they marry, there are several cases of murder of their Nigerian spouses. So that's why I said their model is something more. I don't have a word for it now. So then industrial accident is common on their construction. Now, I don't know whether people can see this that is very popular, but because it's a play in within play, it may not work. But what I will do is I will send it to the platform so that people can play that short film of what we mean people are going through. Then, sorry. Okay, so this is second to the last slide. We need to decolonize transports. What are the ways to go? I believe the first thing that all of us, those in Africa context, is that we need to work on the policy. There must be a policy evangelization. So once you have a policy, that is the spring from which all other things will be embedded. And what do you want to embed? You want to embed equitable infrastructural investments and marginalized. It will involve the community in the participation. Then you go for non-motorized reduction of reliance on fossil fuel. Then you ensure there is cultural sensitivity. Blend modern infrastructure with indigenous practices. I mean, before now, people used to mend their roads by interlock blocks. We have a design in School of Transport where we did waste to wet, and these blocks can be used to make roads and could be used in the rural areas, especially that we make the road motorable. So environmental consideration. So, but I believe that the core of decolonizing transport in Africa that I know, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, because we are so similar, Nigeria and others, is to go and attack it from the transportation policy of each country. That all scholars should work to, if there is a law anywhere, if there is a policy, we should work to amend that policy to remove the vestiges of colonization in the transport system. And all these 5 elements will be what we will now be infusing into it. So it's my conclusion. I mean, African transport is a way to, it's a powerful tool for reducing poverty. So by dismantling the historical inequities and embracing sustainable solutions, we can create a more accessible and just mobility landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, SG. And I think that's great the way that you brought it together and managed to talk to us about the ways in which the equity aspects, and starting from the grassroots, starting from existing practices, and thinking about providing mass sort of transport for all, and not just transport systems, but also mobility systems. I think that's really nice, thinking about walking and non-motorized modes, and the way that decolonized policy would perhaps pay more attention to those issues. So I'd like to really thank all 3 speakers, and in the interest of time and being able to have some addressing of some of your really interesting questions. Everyone's resonating in the chat. Great presentations. You'll see that there's a few questions around some of the things that you've brought up here. So I'll navigate some of the chat for you. But Tim, I would like to first, as my co-chair of this series, to introduce Tim Schwanham from the Transport Studies Unit at Oxford, who's the director there, and to invite him to maybe ask the first question.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to Astrid, to Lela and Samuel for their excellent presentations, very stimulating. And I'm trying to sort of ask a question that ties all 3 presentations together, and that is about that relationship between knowledge and finance. Because I think Lela was making this very, very important point about finance and how that leads to erasure of local knowledges, and how with money comes power and comes the prioritization of certain types of knowledge. So if we're looking, but it doesn't really matter whether we look at Eastern Europe, we look at Africa, South Asia, all regions with enormous needs for infrastructure development. We can talk about what kind of infrastructure that needs to be, but the fact is it needs to be developed, and the money needs to come from somewhere, right? So how can do any of you know about examples where investment from outside, whether that is from the global north, whether that is from the global east, has come in ways that has really valorized local knowledges? Can we think about positive examples, positive cases, not to sort of immediately highlight them as best practice, but I think we do need positive cases in order to study and learn from and better understand this nexus of finance, knowledge, and neo-colonial regimes.
Thanks, Tim. That's a great question. That's a great question. Lela, any thoughts?
This very much relates what I wanted to briefly say, right? I mean, on the one hand, we can emphasize certain things that come through even with very dependent development, like in Tbilisi, certain positive aspects of it. On the other hand, more broadly, I would always advocate that some of these countries need to increase their tax base, including more local tax base by taxing car drivers on parking, etc., which is a little bit happening, but also, I mean, the broader task would be also rethinking political economy of these places and really engaging with it, because that allows us to then state the limits of public transport reform. Yet, we also should work with lesser evil principle in this sense. And again, looking at other infrastructural projects, and infrastructure is a big deal, right? Because it's, of course, we say there is so much need, and now there is so much finance, but it's for specific kinds of infrastructure. Beyond.
Thanks, Lela.
Sorry.
So Sami, I think SG, I think you were saying earlier about the road, and that so much had been spent on the road project, and it could have financed so much more if it hadn't have been on this huge, great big highway system that runs through the center of Lagos, and the money could have been better spent. But I mean, I know that there's resistance to smaller projects, right?
Yes, of course. I mean, and there are two aspects to it. If you have to scratch for this positive angle, I know of some agencies now, AFDB and Afrexim Bank, bringing finances, funding that are targeted towards projects, transportation projects designed by local people and for local people. So the string attached is less strenuous, the fund from there. But this may sound far-fetched. The foundations, I mentioned Folvo to somebody that for me is like a restorative justice. Now, by training so many new African scholars, and like INTALiNC now, decolonizing the knowledge base is for me the way, because I am what I am because of my linkage with Karen, because I mean, it shocked me to say, so if a white man is thinking, then let me now think deeply. Knowledge talk is very crucial. And that's why I said the policy and the knowledge control is more invidious, it's more toxic, and it's more difficult to deal with than the rest. Because the West, or those who are bringing the money, if you say no and you insist this is what I want to do, they won't force you. They want to borrow your money. But because it's the brain is already captured, the attitude is okay, they are bringing money to support transportation, when even that will not achieve anything. The money spent on Abuja rail system, like Giwa studied for his PhD, the system is done, not more than 9 months, and the Chinese, The Chinese are still having, and we are still paying the loan. So two angles. Some of the local agencies like Africa, they are more amenable to supporting, transportation justice project. Then most of the foundations that are training, Africans in transportation research and all that, they are building a crop of young people that will affect the policy and affect the attitude. And I think those are the two areas. And if you ask me which one is my higher priority, is for something called decolonizing the mind.
So decolonizing the mind, and somebody pointed this out in one of the chats, that there is this whole thing about decolonizing the mindset within the knowledge bases of transport planning, so that we actually don't have a northern mindset around these things. And I think that's really true. I think that for as long as we are training our professionals in northern thinking and northern transport planning, then we're never really going to become able to deliver more contextually sensitive projects. You're quite right, SG, in that respect. I think, Lela, I was going to ask you, you were talking about the sort of BRT system and the fact that it seems to be that is more of a decolonial sort of way. Although actually we have seen quite a lot of BRT systems that are not necessarily reaching much further than the sort of very bit of the city centre. And certainly for our INTALiNC project, we are quite often dealing with communities on the urban periphery who don't get served ever by those schemes, whether they're those infrastructure schemes. And I wonder whether it's the same in Eastern Europe, and whether some people are still being more well served by these systems than others, and whether it's really addressing transport inequalities.
Thanks, Karen. This is, of course, the crucial question. Gladly, something particular happened in Tbilisi, that at the point that the reform was being designed, this kind of mid-level bureaucrats managed to have quite a lot of power. So they designed the system so that the route coverage is quite broad-based. So they managed to deprioritize the tram system that I talked about. That would be then this kind of one line connecting central district, and to build a BRT system, which of course I would never talk of BRT system in itself as a decolonial tool, even if sometimes it has come through as south-to-south knowledge exchange and so on and so on. I don't think BRT in itself is at all decolonial tool. It's one of the, very much promoted by Western institutions tool. But the way it has been planned in Tbilisi, at least basing on what experts would say and what I could see, read out from the map, seems quite good. The challenge is that the implementation at this point is slow, but it's still, it's going. So if they manage to make the BRT corridors work, they are to serve also urban peripheries. Not also, but they are to serve really urban peripheries to be better.
That's really interesting. I think actually Igor also put a thing in that he was saying that in he was talking about Bulgarian city of Pleven, and says it's a good example of where external funding has been used to remove diesel buses and electric. But he suspects that not only is the enthusiasm of the trolley bus organization was instrumental in that, and that also local employees are happy. So that would seem like something that maybe it is like an external funding, but it's not necessarily a failure of being able to have like locally responsive and pleasing outcomes. So I think that's quite important in that respect. So that, thank you for that. Maybe we've got something to learn in terms of this trajectory of the experiences of south to south. So I know, for example, that the South African policymakers that designed and helped to introduce BRT in South Africa, in Johannesburg, spent a lot of time visiting Bogota, spent a lot of time learning from those systems, but then it's been slightly criticized that they also perhaps overemphasized the way in which Bogota had used it to break the cartels, and that maybe that meant that they weren't being integrated enough with the existing systems that were there, for example, the bus systems and so forth. So I think we can learn from each other, we can transfer knowledge, but it's also really important to understand the political context. We've got lots of people agreeing about decolonizing the mindset in the chat. I think Tony Plum is asking stuff about modeling and the transport modeling system. And actually SG also referred to that, I think, in his presentation, where he was talking about these stages of development. And it took me back to my time when I was learning about stages of development, you know, like for countries. And it's a bit horrifying. You know, you get to this stage, then that stage, then that stage, and this incremental thing. And SGI was like, you know, given that the transport is the lifeblood of the city, and given that it's in chaos in a lot of African cities, and that lots of people don't get access to it, what can we do to sort of like speed the process up? Because basically we can't wait long enough to mature these systems on a stage-based process. So have you got any ideas about how we might leapfrog? Maybe not technology, but progress.
Well, for now, what we are doing, some of us that are scholars in the field, is to, first of all, like transportation was never a program in Nigerian system. It is transport geography, transport economics, transport, if you are going to do it at all. But we have come a long way in, like LASUNA has the first school of transport and logistics, train out new young people that are well trained in the field. We will not think that you only make road to the rural area to bring food for the people in the city. Now, then we have a University of Transport. We have so many institutions. So for me, that is the base of then the second is that we still have to do a lot of advocacy because the political class just understand the language of contracts. So if it's not big, they are not interested. So I don't have immediate answer to leapfrog. What is in my mind is a gradual process that, or the only other advantage is that technology is moving at a rapid rate and is forcing certain things on us. I mean, like CNG buses, CNG this, CNG that. So that is also changing the direction of things. So I don't have immediate answer of the problem.
Okay, SG, that's fine, because we really are running out of time anyway. Just very, very quickly, I see Carol Martins is in the room, and I think maybe a good way to lead us into the next thing is he says, why think about decolonizing? It's just changing the mindset, and it doesn't matter whether it's in the north, the west, the south, the east, or you know, or wherever, that actually is a whole new mindset that we need for sustainable transport wherever we are. Because especially for the people for whom transport doesn't work for now, and that's quite a nice, I think, roundup to this. And we will next time, and I don't know whether Emma can get the slide up in time, but if she can, we've got the fundraiser. I'll remind you again, but also next program. Thank you, Emma. The next slide, please. That we've got next time on the 29th of May, the Decolonising popular transport. So what we've got here is some speakers. Chair will be Tim Schwanen, and some speakers that of representing lots of informal community transport types of organisations, and that will talk a bit about the whole issue around public versus private informal transport systems. We're then thinking a little bit on the 12th of June about marginalisation, decolonisation and gender. I will chair this one, hopefully a bit better than I've managed to chair this one today, and do a bit better job. Again, a range of speakers from different organisations, different perspectives, also considering a bit the rural perspective. And then, as I said at the beginning of the series, on the 3rd of July, we'll run a hybrid session where we'll be in Manchester in person with some panelists, Winnie Matula from Nairobi, Samuel Odwumi, who has been with us today, SG, from Lagos State, who's going to come to Manchester, Daniel Oviedo from UCL, Gina Porter from University of Durham, and possibly even more people if they turn up on the door at the day and have actually been in the seminar series already. So if you can come to Manchester, it would be amazing, but you do need to sign up because we've got obviously limited space. If you can't come to Manchester, please do join us online. And yeah, let me just remind you, thank you, Emma, about the crowdsourcing. It would be great. And my intention is, we find that actually they charge you a bit extra on top as like an almost like GoFundMe tax. So my intention is that I will cover that extra amount of money with INTALiNC funding raised from other sources as well to match your donations. So thank you very much. It's been great attendance. Wonderful to see so many people. Please do join us next time on the 29th of May and give a round of applause to the speakers. Thank you so much.